Hi, we're live. Welcome to the Leveling Up Podcast, Episode 1. I'm VP Quinn, and with me is our newly minted blog manager, Josh.
Hi.
This is a new ongoing podcast that the High Level Games Podcasting Network is going to be producing on a hopefully monthly schedule that is going to be digging into various issues in tabletop role-playing games, with everything from GM and player tips to more serious and in-depth. Be sure to check us out on all of our media platforms and social media accounts, from our Facebook page, conveniently titled High Level Games, our Twitter account at HLG_corporate, our YouTube channel, also called High Level Games, and finally our Twitch channel, High_Level_Games. Also, please give us a positive rating on iTunes, as that really helps our stuff to get out to more and more people. Our topic today, gaming as empathy. Well, Josh, how's it going?
It's going pretty well, Quinn. How are you today?
I'm doing very, very well. It is a overcast day here in this fall in Western Canada. And what's like for you out there in Yankee Land?
It's bright and sunny in Maryland in the DC metro area. I think it's about 60 degrees out, so probably a little bit warmer.
What is that in real temperatures?
Let's see, about 15, maybe.
Oh, that's not bad.
No, it's not bad at all. Had to do some mental gymnastics there to give you a number.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I do not understand Fahrenheit, and every time someone tells me it, I go, I don't know. I actually grew up right on the U.S. Canada border, and we would get American television from North Dakota, and there was this whole phenomenon of these weather people on TV would occasionally tell you the temperatures in Canada and the temperatures in the States, but they would use Celsius in Canada and Fahrenheit in the States, and it looked as though the temperature dropped 50 degrees at the border. And I'm like, I just assumed that Americans thought that's how they knew where to put the border.
Well, they're shockingly cold there and fairly decent here. All right, I guess I know where I'm going to stay.
Yeah, so I've always had a struggle with that. Anyways, yeah. I think right now we're supposed to be introducing ourselves. So
we are. So let me start. Since you gave us a great introduction to the podcast. So I'm Josh Heath. I am the blog manager for High Level Games. Beyond that, I also am the editor-in-chief and owner and administrator of Keep on the Heathlands and the Inclusive Gaming Network. You can find us on Twitter at inclusive_games and on Facebook at Inclusive Gaming Network, or on the web at www.keepontheheathlands.com. That wasn't a self-referential title at all. It was. But we're writing about inclusivity in games and taking things similar to what we're going to be talking about in this podcast. So it and High Level Games are great resources.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Inclusive Gaming Network, so I'm really glad to have started to work on this stuff together. So very, very exciting, and I'm ecstatic to see what the future holds. Definitely. As you guys probably know, because I'm incredibly famous on the interwebs. No. I'm VP Quinn over here at High Level Games. High Level Games is my brainchild, and it has just gotten ridiculously out of control on me. So I'm holding on for dear life as it continues to change and do new and interesting things. Yeah, that's about it.
Cool. So when did you get into gaming, Quinn?
When did I get into gaming? I guess I got into gaming when I was about 12 years old. My first exposure to gaming was a friend of my girlfriend at the time, like a cousin of theirs or something, came into town and was spending the summer there. And they brought a little package of ratty old box set for the for the Dungeons and Dragons box set, and then a first or second edition, I think first edition Shadowrun as well.
Oh, cool.
And so we started to look at this stuff and try to play it and figure it out. We didn't have dice. We had like half the rules, right? Because if you remember in those old box sets, the rules were like in different books,
Yep.
in like 4 or 5 books or something, and I think we had 3 of them or something. So we had like 5 monsters to choose from and stuff. And then we just started playing, and we figured it out, and we just played with like dice we stole from the Monopoly game and just worked stuff out. And later on, when I was at camp one summer, a friend I made there gave me Palladium's Ninjas and Super Spies, and that was the first one I'd ever owned for myself. Which, looking back on it was a great premise. What a terrible, terrible mechanics.
That can be said of a lot of Palladium stuff. Love their settings. Mechanics-wise, struggles. Lots of struggles.
Yes. But I mean, I think that I figured out, and I started to DM right away, and I mostly have been running games since, right? It's not that I haven't played, but I think some people just gravitate towards that position. I definitely was that guy.
Yep. Yeah, I hear you. I think I did pretty much the same thing. You know, I was not quite as young as you getting into gaming. Interestingly, I didn't get into it until about 14, 15 maybe at the earliest. And that was a little bit of experimentation with Robotech of all games, which is another Palladium game, but I love it. Like, absolutely love that game. The setting is amazing. The rules are terrible. The setting is amazing. That's all that matters.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I want you to know that not only do I have a bunch of the Robotech Palladium books sitting on my shelf right now,
nice.
But they've recently put up every episode of the old Robotech cartoon on Netflix, and my daughter and I are watching it together.
It's awesome. I need to get into it. I haven't let myself dive into that hole quite yet, but it's going to happen soon because the show is awesome. So.
Yes.
And then from there, I went in a weird direction gaming myself. Instead of doing a lot of tabletop, I got into LARP, and not the fun, cool boffer LARP, but the Vampire the Masquerade, rock, paper, scissors, standing around and being dramatic and evil. But that's how I got into that because I was into acting, and it was awesome. And I got into
I will say that I'll go to my grave saying that most people that make fun of those LARPs are insanely jealous.
Absolutely. The reactions people have when they see some costuming stuff that comes out of those LARPs are like, wow, that looks like a ton of fun. And it is. So if you're listening or watching this down the road, go and look up an organization like One World by Night or Underground Theater or Mind's Eye Society and go and play some vampires because you'll enjoy yourself.
Awesome.
What are you playing right now?
Oh, so many things. Okay, so we have every Sunday afternoon from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. Game that we get together, and we switch off. We alternate weekly. I'm running a D&D game bi-weekly that's set in Ravenloft and using the 3.5 rule system.
Nice.
Not because I have anything against like 5th edition or something, but we've been playing that game for probably a little over 3 years. We're playing through a series of adventures that are known as the Grand Conjunction.
Mm-hmm.
And it is pretty phenomenal and having a lot of fun doing that. I'm also playing in a Fate system game on the alternative weeks that may or may not end up being a actual play on our podcasting network here at High Level Games. And in that one, I'm playing in the Aether Sea setting, and I'm playing a goblin named Grill Zaz, who is a violent survivor as his high aspect, and his trouble is greedy as Trump. And so he's been a lot of fun to play, and he has a really high strained voice, which sometimes makes me dizzy if he has to talk a lot during the campaigns and stuff. I'm also playing Hero Kids. I'm running that with my daughter and her friend and her friend's dad occasionally. Maybe once every month or two, we get together and play that, and then they have like a play date and stuff like that. Because my daughter has really wanted to be involved in this stuff, and she really has enjoyed her foray into it. Hero Kids is a really good introductory, kind of straightforward dungeon crawly fantasy setting game for kids.
Yeah, based on the article we that was on the website about that, I actually got a friend really interested in it, and he's going to try to get his. I think his son's 6, maybe almost 7, and he's like, I think he'd be the perfect age to get into this. I'm like, hey, dude, like I would run that. I would learn it and run that for you because I love corrupting the youth into this wonderful hobby.
Yeah. And I know Monty Cook Games also has No Thank You Evil, which I've not really looked at that much, but some of the talk around it has become very interesting, and I think they've done some influential and interesting game design elements around scary topics and things like that, and issues of consent around kids that are worth unpacking, actually. I'm also playing on Roll20 on Friday nights. I play with another group. We had been playing a 5th edition campaign, and we're likely to start another 5th edition campaign, but one of our number has been away for a while. And so we've invited the heavy metal GM to come in, and he GM'd some 13th Age for us for a few sessions, just because we'd never tried it before. We're just finishing that off, and then I'm kind of running the quick start rules of 7th edition Call of Cthulhu for them, and we did some of that last night with the classic, with the Haunting of the House, or the House. It's like a classic 5th edition starter adventure. And
I love how we can say classic 5th edition at this point with Call of Cthulhu. Like, that was so long ago. It was the 5th edition, and you're like, yeah, it's such a great game, though.
Yes, and I've never really been able to play it. Several years ago, I realized I had an H.P. Lovecraft hole in my education. Right, the shape of that hole needed to be filled by H.P. Lovecraft, and so I got a copy of his collected works and just started tearing through them. I had to quit reading his stuff after about a week and a half, though, because my mind was not doing so well.
So the Elder Dark just at the edges, you're like,
it was
great
just
old ones. They have something good to say to us.
So I had to put it away for a little while, but I just love Lovecraft, and so when I got an opportunity to play Call of Cthulhu at a con here in Edmonton recently, Intrigue Con, I really enjoyed it, and I just wanted to try it out with some other people and just see if I could run it, and it's been really interesting.
Nice, that's awesome.
So those are all the games that I'm playing, I think.
Well, I feel drastically under gamed comparatively. Let's see. I was running a game every Friday night. One Friday was Vampire the Masquerade. We were playing using the new Dark Ages 20th Anniversary Edition rules, which for any World of Darkness fans out there, if there is a single book in the 20th Anniversary line that you should have, it is that book. The Vampire 20th Anniversary Edition Dark Ages book is the best White Wolf book I think I have ever owned. And that is saying something because I own a lot of them. But it really, go out and buy it immediately because it's great. And we were running through the Transylvania Chronicles, which was it's the first time, I think it's the very first time I've ever used a published White Wolf, what do they call them? Adventure series.
Okay.
And it was awesome, except I set the game about 100 years prior to where the books were. So I was technically using the adventure module, but homebrewing it all anyway. And hoping to get my players to go through the ages so we could get started with the book stuff. And then that game collapsed, which is a shame because it was going pretty well. And that was just, people having lives and needing to do different things.
Mm-hmm.
But right now, every other Friday, I run a Mage the Ascension game, which using, again, the 20th anniversary rules for Mage, which are also great, but that book is like 900 pages. And it's very,
Right.
yeah, it's huge. Um, it's great. The game is great. The book is humongous, and it's hard to kind of figure out, like, this is how the rules work when you have to go through so many pages to figure it out. That being said, I know the game well enough that I can just kind of roll it, like run it, and then grab the book if needed to try to figure out a rule if and when we need to. In that game, I cannot say anything about the storyline because my players might listen to this, but it is awesome. We're dealing with lots of world-shattering stuff, and they are currently in the Midnight Circus, which is one of the coolest little supplements that White Wolf has. So it's kind of the gaming end. And I just ran a Chronicles of Darkness Mortals game for High Level Games corporate retreat recently, which was a ton of fun.
It was a ton of fun. I got to play in that, and I hadn't played in any kind of Chronicles of Darkness ever before. I'd done a little bit of World of Darkness when I was much, much younger, and just couldn't get a lot of people to play it. But speaking of Mage, I mean, that's one of the games out there that I think looks so amazing, but every time I've seen that page count, the sticker shock has backed me off. Because I sat there and went, how am I going to put the time in that I would need to do to learn this game so I can teach it to others? And it's just not something I can do right now.
Yeah, the interesting solution to that I suggest to people is to actually get a copy of the revised version of the game, read through those rules. Don't even read the setting stuff, just read through those rules, and then get the 20th anniversary edition, read the setting stuff, which is only the first like third of the book, and then you've got enough to run a game. And then use that 20th anniversary edition as like rules checking, because the revised and 20th anniversary edition, though they're different in some ways, they're similar enough that you can run it effectively, kind of doing that weird sort of amalgamation, which maybe that isn't good advice, but that's what I suggest to people.
Well, that sounds interesting. I mean, it's such a cool idea of a game that I want to figure out a way to try it. So,
yeah, it's worth it.
Cool.
It really is. Like I would. I've been thinking about diving into the like Roll20 kind of online gaming thing. So I've got a Friday night free at the moment. So maybe I'll do a Mage or do something else at some point.
You have Friday nights free?
Well, I have every other Friday night free at the moment.
You almost talked yourself into a spot at my table.
Well, yeah.
All right. What? I guess now that we have what we're playing now, what kind of games did you start with? Like, what did you play the most? What have you played the most over the years?
Yeah. So, World of Darkness, cliche, but it's been my jam. I played that more than anything overall. But believe it or not, the game that I played most of was 3.5 D&D in the Birthright fan created
Birthright.
One of my favorite games ever. And it was mostly the GM that made this game, but he is the best game master I've ever played with. And he created such a detailed, like the maps we created as a team are so detailed. The adventures we ran were so detailed. I had 2 characters die in that game, and this is not a game where you die and you can get resurrected. So I had 2 characters die, and that's a huge deal. My first character totally deserved to die. He was terrible. He was a terrible character concept. And I was like, when he died, I was like, you know what? Fair. Like, he should die because the story, it was totally appropriate. And then the second character, I was playing like this high-flying adventure, like rogue who was in charge of the largest duchy in part of our like United Kingdoms. And I'm totally telling the story terribly. But the coolest thing about him was when he died, we actually role played his death and his descent into the underworld, and his wife, his in-character wife, sacrificed herself and their unborn child to bring him back to life. And that process of bringing him back to life and then imbuing him with another goddess's power, which, again, I'm telling this story terribly, was the most emotionally powerful gaming session I have ever experienced as a player. And this is in Birthright. This is in D&D. This is the game that most people think, that's not like the emotional game. That's not the deep game. And it's like, that was the deepest game I've ever played personally.
Wow, I have a huge soft spot for Birthright. So I got the original box set, and it has influenced many, many, many things since then.
Yeah, it's such a great game. So well written. The domain rules are awesome. Even in the second edition AD&D, which is not perfect, like it's still good, and it like gives you so much to work from.
I completely agree.
So what about you? What game have you been playing the most out of all the different ones?
So I've been playing for about a quarter century at this point. It's difficult. I mean, the short answer is D&D. I've been playing a ton of D&D. I think that I played second edition, and I held onto and gripped second edition AD&D for a long time after third edition came out, and then 3.5. And I was definitely the old grognard that was sitting there, and a lot of my friends are like, "Well, we're gonna go with third edition. Armor class makes sense now." And I was just like, "Can't figure out Thaco. I don't want you in my game, right?" And just, or is it Thaco? Some people I've heard pronounce it Thaco.
It's Thaco. Anyone tells you it's Thaco, I don't know what they're talking about. What's that pronunciation?
All right. So anyways, I definitely played second edition a lot. That being said, I have a friend of mine, Antonio, who was just committed. I taught him how to roleplay, and he betrayed me by immediately running around and buying all the 3.5 stuff. And then he wanted to drag our gaming group kicking and screaming into the present. And so he did, and he got everyone playing 3.5, which led to him DMing a 5-year campaign that was ridiculously epic. And then following up, I was like, I really want to play Ravenloft, and so since 3.5 is the one that everyone knew, we stuck with 3.5. And so we've been doing that for 3 years now or more. So
that's awesome.
A lot of that. I mean, second edition still, I think, outnumbers in just years any other edition or any other game. But right now I'm playing a ton of 3.5 and have been for the last 7-8 years.
That's great. I got to tell you, like 3.5 for me, I spent a lot of time with that system, maybe 7 to 10 years, like playing it regularly, like in different games, doing different things with different groups. And Ravenloft in particular, obviously, I'm a fan of the World of Darkness, and I'm a fan of horror games. So Ravenloft was kind of that middle ground to kind of get people that were D&D-ish people to move toward the horror. And I got to say, I ran a Ravenloft campaign for about 1.5 years, and it was one of the best campaigns I've ever run. I know I say great things about Birthright, but for me, that was probably one of my favorite campaigns to run myself.
Yeah, I think Ravenloft's probably my favorite published D&D setting for a bunch of reasons. And like, I get some of the criticisms of it. Don't get your gothic horror on my fantasy roleplay, like that sort of thing, and vice versa. Don't get your fantasy roleplay on my gothic horror. That being said, the 3.5 Sword and Sorcery imprints with the Gazetteers is, in my opinion, the high watermark for any published setting in any system ever. Yep. It is just insanely good.
And published by White Wolf.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, incredibly good writing. The art was great in most of them. The only thing I didn't like about the Gazetteers were the prestige classes, which some of them were atrocious. Right. But definitely, yeah, like very well done books overall.
And I mean, the folks over at Fraternity of Shadows have kept the Ravenloft torch burning. There is an insane amount of material over there that I still use to this day, which includes Pathfinder conversions, Savage World conversions. They were doing a 5th edition conversion for, I think, a year and a half before Curse of Strahd was released.
Cool.
So, I mean, they're in my opinion, the go-to place for all things Ravenloft.
Yeah, I've checked out some of their stuff, and they definitely have some cool stuff. I was actually working on a small piece for their most recent publication, but I decided not to push through with it. I'm like, you know what, this is not going to look the way I want it to. So I got like 2/3 of it done, and I was like, okay, let me scrap this, put it to side, and I might throw it over to them next time they're doing one of their gazetteers or whatever they call them.
Quoth the Raven or something.
Yeah, Quoth the Raven.
Yeah.
Which is cool. That's such a cool little publication.
Oh, I love the internet.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So let's move to like the next question. And we're doing questions because it helps us kind of focus what we're talking about. So we've talked a little bit about what kind of games we like to play, but let's talk about like genres and themes. Like what kind of genres and themes do we like to play through?
Well, that's a great question. And I think that speaks a lot to the person you're talking to. And for me, I think the reason that I wanted to become a game master, a dungeon master, a storyteller, or a keeper, or whatever you're going to call it, off the kit and boodle is on one hand, I wanted to bring my vision to life. And I thought that was the best and most powerful position, to be able to bring these stories to life that I just didn't even know I had burning inside me. Mm-hmm. But the other thing is that I tend towards incredibly dark themes. And so I really loved being able to embody the bad guy, right? And so I really enjoyed being the awful human being that I could put in front of players for them to deal with. As I've matured as a person and a gamer, what that has led me into is to explore those dark themes in a lot of different ways. One of the reasons I love Ravenloft is it's not just bad, right? It's not just evil. It's gothic horror. And gothic horror as a genre is a very specific type of horror, which is not necessarily about evil. It's about corruption, right? And that to me is fascinating, because I've said before that to understand gothic horror in the Ravenloft universe correctly, you need to understand a way your character can be lawful good and a corrupt dark lord at the same time. And once you understand that, I think that you've kind of gotten it, right? Like the no-win situations and becoming obsessed, trying to do the right thing maybe, but in all the wrong ways. Or the implications are just too terrible to behold, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I really enjoy those things. So as far as genres go, I have that going on, but I also have I'm a hopeless romantic at heart. My favorite comic book characters are like Thor, Superman, Captain America, and Captain Canuck. I just really enjoy those sorts of things. So I love seeing the Boy Scout. I love seeing the light, the pinpoint of light in the sea of darkness. Mm-hmm. And I love seeing what that looks like, and people that won't compromise when everything goes to hell, and people that look out across the entirety of the pressures of society and culture and say, no, I'm going to do the right thing regardless of the personal costs. I think that's a really compelling story for me. Mm-hmm. And so I tend to play in games that have incredibly dark, gritty themes, but at the heart, there's a heroic, epic undertone. Those are the things that I like the most, right? And I can veer off into other things for a little while, but I think home for me is there.
So, me too. I think
Ditto.
Yeah, it's hard to really like add a whole lot to that. That's a little bit different. I think my main difference is wanting to, as a storyteller, provide my players an opportunity to see reflections of themselves. This is one of the themes that I like to build into all of my games, is that every character that my players play is going to be, to some degree, a reflection of who they are. And I want to reflect through the story things about themselves that they don't realize. Good things, bad things, wonderful things, terrible things. They're going to see slightly reflected back on them, and be able to recognize that, play through it as a character, and then decide this is something that I'm going to change, keep, grow, empower within myself from that. That's been the power of gaming for me, is to be able to be really self-reflective, and I try to utilize that mood within the games that I construct. As far as genre, I like gothic punk, obviously, because that's the world of darkness. But on top of that, I really like, I enjoy splatter horror, which not a ton of people are huge fans of, but I use it sparingly. Pretty much 1 in 7 games will have a very splatter horror type story for that night. So, for example, and this is going to be a little dark, I ran that Ravenloft game I mentioned before. There was one game where they went into this house that was constructed out of living bodies, and they had to pass through sphincters to get farther into the house, and they had to end up killing the house, but they had to pass through its most inner sphincter to get to the heart and destroy the heart from inside. That was a night of blood and guts and feces and lots of other fun things throwing about. So occasionally I really enjoy that sort of visceral splatter horror.
Oh, absolutely. Very Stephen King-esque situation, right? I mean, I've often said Stephen King doesn't do horror very well very often, but man, he can do a 3-page description of a murder scene that will curl your hair.
Exactly.
Absolutely. That is dark as hell.
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing is that most of the time the characters that I have my players playing, they're super, like, they want to be super heroic, even if they're like dark characters, even if they run into these scenes and they're immediately repulsed by it, and they retreat into the I want to be better than this thing around me from that. So I think like those situations allow people to realize like even the darkest character you're playing can be a hero if you put them in the right situation to see like, I'm not this. I want to be better than this.
Yeah. I think that's fantastic.
So
also, I'm likely to steal the sphincter play thing.
You should. I've used it now in 2 different, totally different worlds. So it's super visceral. It's super like horrific.
Oh, yeah, I can just imagine.
So why do you play the game, these type of like horror games for you, like the gothic horror? What about that kind of is interesting to you? We touched on it a little bit, but
I think on one hand it's cathartic, right? In the sense that I think that in most human beings, in all human beings, I'll say, there is a darkness. There is a fear of the things that go bump in the night, whether or not you think those things that go bump are supernatural or even worse, your neighbors.
mm-hmm.
And I think there is a recognition amongst most people that there are dark forces at work. They can be blatantly banal and human, but I think there's still darkness.
Mm-hmm.
I think that one of the most interesting recognitions needs to be, however, that darkness that you are often fighting against is not an external force, but it's a shared human force.
Yep.
And exploring that for me has been really, really interesting. And part of it is that I can excise some of my darker qualities through play, in the sense that I can, be the bad guy that's going to slap you if you say the wrong thing, right? I can be a megalomaniacal dictator, right? I can be all of these things and explore that aspect that I think exists in myself, certainly, and in humans in general, I suspect, in a very safe way. Not to mention, it's not just cathartic for me. For me, it's art, and I've said this before on the other podcast. I am not backing away from the statement I'm making more and more now, that that role playing games at their best are art.
Yep.
This is a creative process. We're creating something, and good art makes you think. And sometimes good art leaves you disturbed. It leaves you walking out of a movie theater thinking to yourself, why did I cheer for that guy?
Yep.
Or it leaves you sitting there going, I feel uncomfortable, and that maybe was the point of this piece.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing about that is the gaming as art concept is that there are, just like there are different layers of visual arts that some would say this is just fun art, this is just, um, geez, there's a word I'm looking for, not candy corn. That doesn't sound right. Anyway, it's like
Well,
disposable
between
art.
like low and folk, or like high art, yeah.
Yeah, and gaming can be all of those things. It can be, this pulp kind of just exciting thing to do for 2 hours or 4 hours or 20 hours, or it can be literature. It can be War and Peace. It can be these incredibly disturbing but moving, ways of looking at the human experience. And I think that's the awesome part about gaming, is that it really literally can be art on every level, if depending on the group, if they want to do that.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think I would agree with you in saying that I would argue that all gaming is art, and I think that it is. It is often in my life I've discovered that low art is high art, in the sense that I have discovered incredible themes that are being talked about in things that people hand wave away. I've often said my love of sci-fi and fantasy is rooted in the idea that I love big ideas.
Right.
And very often the big ideas, I don't know who said this first. I'm plagiarizing someone right now, but I don't remember who. But in my opinion, big ideas often come from the books with like the silver embossed dragon on the cover. Right? Because they're unfettered to be able to allow those big ideas to be kicked around. And sometimes they're big ideas about the nature of humanity. And sometimes they're big ideas about the nature of people. And I think that we often forget how, as social polemics, that's where the great pieces of the genre of sci-fi and fantasy started. If you look at Dracula, if you looked at The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, you look at Frankenstein. I was recently talking about Frankenstein and pointing out to a friend of mine that one of the things that we often forget when we're looking at Frankenstein, interpreting Frankenstein, is it was set in present day.
Right.
Right. And what are the implications on that for its social commentary? If we look at H.G. Wells and The Time Machine, or Orson and 1984, these are, or even The War of the Worlds, these are all social commentaries that made big statements, huge statements.
Even what the weird and pulp fiction of the early 1900s, the 20s, the 30s, you look at H.P. Lovecraft, there's social commentary, deep social commentary in some of H.P. Lovecraft stuff. In Burroughs, why can't I remember his full name? Conan. Edgar Rice Burroughs? No, that's Tarzan.
That's Tarzan, yeah.
Oh, my word. It's one of those moments. Doesn't matter.
Tarzan guy, or the Conan guy.
Conan guy. Someone's going to yell at me for this. Lots of my friends will. There's social commentary there. There's commentary on the humanity, the myth making, the construction of how humans understand their world and understand the world before history. Mm-hmm. All throughout those works, you look at things like Conan in particular, and Conan is a myth of humanity at one point, even with all of these fantastical elements built within it.
By the way, it was Howard. Robert Howard.
I knew that. I was totally in the wrong realm with his name.
I Googled it, so don't think that it popped in my head. But I think you're right. And particularly with H.P. Lovecraft and Howard, there was a strange sense in the 1920s to give their historical perspective. And to be fair, I will point out, they were both filthy racists.
Yep.
Incredibly racist and misogynists in the worst possible view of the term. And that can't be separated from their art. Even if you can be a fan of their art as well as not appreciating those aspects of it. But the social commentary that is being made in Lovecraft's work is huge in the case that if you look at how he starts to view humanity's place in the universe, just at this time when science and communication is opening the world, and the last few hidden places and hidden things are being uncovered and discovered, and not just discovered, but discovered in such a way so that anyone, anywhere, with access to this communication technology as it was growing, will know about it. And the world is becoming smaller, but he was looking out at what that meant. Because as we were discovering so much more about the world we were on, it suddenly became very apparent that we knew nothing.
Right.
We were starting to begin to understand what we didn't understand.
So let's transition from this discussion about gaming as a high form of art, or as a form of art, as a form of social commentary, to our discussion on gaming as empathy, and gaming being able to be used to make us more empathetic, perhaps, or it's something that drives people that are particularly strong with empathy into it. I guess let me ask you a question as a way of starting this conversation. Why do you think empathy is something related to gaming?
I think that we've been touching on it a lot, in the sense that it is the artist's action, it is the actor's action, a role within role-playing, to try to put yourself in the shoes of somebody else and take on a character and try to understand who that person is. Now, some people do that only insofar as it allows them to stab the orc. And awesome, right? You're still putting yourself outside of that, because that's not part of your typical experience, at least as far as I know. To the point where, with fully immersive live-action role-playing, where you're getting costuming, you're getting fully immersive, or as immersive as possible, groups of people together that are taking on entire societies, and maybe even finding a place that evokes a certain thing and trying to get really deep into somebody else and something else. You have to put yourself in that perspective. Every single time you've ever heard at the table, it's what my character would do.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You are acting in empathy. And especially, I have a general rule at my table that I want your next character not to be like your last character, right? And I mean, I think a lot of people have like their default, this is what I'm comfortable playing person, and I don't think that's a bad thing. But if you've played the Paladin for 5 years, it's time to play the selfish mage.
Right, play the sorcerer. That,
right.
that loves being out front and being charismatic rather than the paladin that hangs back and broods and thinks about the moral choices going on.
Exactly. Just challenge yourself to do that, because I think that every character that you play, I think, is an aspect of yourself. I think you're bringing alive some part of you, whether you know it or not. And I think it's a beautiful thing. I think that every time somebody says,
oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, I just want to cut into that a little bit. It is an aspect of yourself. It has to be. Every character you create, you're playing it. So parts of you will shine through it. But sometimes I think in the character creation process, you'll look at other people or other things or other media, and you'll say, that's the thing I want to reflect. So you often, like in my character creation process, I usually go through a couple of different steps where I look at I don't want to say a stereotype, but I look at a large picture of something, and then I dive in and I say, what are their motivations from here? What are the things that drive them? What are their goals? And at that point, it's not me that I'm reflecting, but something outside of myself that I'm reflecting. But then aspects of myself get built into that character as we go through the playing process.
Well, I would certainly agree. I think that even when you're mirroring something that's not you, there is an empathic piece to that process.
Yep.
Because you understand the other through the lens of self, right? In the sense that I may not understand why someone uses child soldiers in their fight, in their war. I don't understand that. I'm revolted by that. And if I wanted to, as a DM, have a character that did that because I wanted to have the person you're fighting be revolting and put the moral choice of, okay, you're fighting children. What do you do? What is the moral choice is huge there. If I wanted to do that, I have to somehow bring that to life in a way that's believable.
Yeah.
And whether or not that is touching on something inside myself, or whether or not that is touching on something inside myself and then doing the opposite. You know, what would Quinn do in this situation? Okay, I won't do that. I mean, I think that even that allows a certain amount of empathy.
Absolutely, because you're digging into motivation, and understanding motivation is a key part of being empathetic to someone. You know, when you're talking to someone and you're trying to empathize with their situation, you are looking to understand why they're doing something. If you're in an argument with someone, and you're trying to resolve that argument, you want to understand what the core part of their anger is. So you're asking them questions often, you know, what is the thing that upsets you that brings us here? So when you're creating a character, you're doing the same thing. You're saying, what is it that's driven you to make these decisions that kind of explain how I'm using this character in this world that I'm in? And I think your child soldier's example is one good form of that, but even something more simple like this person is at a nightclub. Okay, why is this person in a nightclub? Well, this person is a vampire, and they feed on people that go to this nightclub. That's their regular feeding zone. The reason they do that is they enjoy the cover that music provides for their feeding. But they like music covering their feeding because they're from 1700s France, and they didn't have this same sort of loud, powerful, beating heartbeat music. And it's something that they really, that reminds them of their humanity. It makes them feel alive temporarily. You know, you can dig into all of this and really feel like, okay, I can understand this creature, this person's thought process, and then bring that to life to some degree.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that that process of trying to figure out, I mean, you often hear actors talk about playing villains, for example, and saying, you know, the villain is never a villain in their own mind, right?
Right.
That's a boring villain. That's terrible art. You know, and so trying to understand why that person is doing that. I mean, if you think of a vampire, for example, that is feeding on people, innocent, generally people in the nightclub, I don't have to agree that a vampire, you know, should be doing those things to get to a point where I start to empathically justify, or at least understand, their perspectives and their understanding of the world and their view. In the end, well, I have to survive. I have an imperative, right? And this is my food. And in order to do this in a quiet enough way so that I don't get hunted down, you know, we have to, you know, keep up the masquerade. We have to be able to kill people in such a way so that suspicions don't arouse, and so on and so forth. We maybe even publish a role-playing game to throw people off the scent.
That's never happened. I don't know what you're talking about, Quinn.
But I think that trying to learn those motivations are very important. I recently had a conversation with someone that was political in nature. Without getting too much into it, I tried to explain to the person that I did not agree. They were angry at me because I was not, in their opinion, sufficiently outraged with a particular result. And I said to them, I am very upset. I wanted better things. That being said, I understand how people made this decision. Even though they might be my political opponents, I understand it. And I think I don't remember who I'm paraphrasing here, but with true understanding, there's love, right?
Yeah.
There is a sense of, I mean, even if you can be disappointed in the one you love, I think it changes the conversation when you start from that place of empathy.
Absolutely. I think the thing there is that when we learn something, I think in gaming, we learn to listen to our players. We learn to listen to ourselves in constructing a story. And I think that helps to then allow us to listen and reflect on the other things we see in the world around us. So when we see people make a decision that at first no one else around us can understand, those of us that game frequently, that are reflective enough, I think we can see those motivations. We can see these are the decisions that have led this person to make this call, because you see that all the time. You see players decide something that seems so crazy, and you're like, okay, I understand why you're doing this. I understand there's some fear here, there's some excitement, there's some, you know, lack of information potentially, or even there's too much information and they boil it down and they say, this is what I'm going to do. This is the path that I'm going to take. And I think our ability to see and recognize that at our tables helps us to then do that other places in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, I think, so there's been a lot of work studying gamers, particularly a lot of this academic work was done, you know, earlier on in when gaming was just starting to be a thing, right, in the 80s. And just to throw out a few examples at you, there's Encycritiques, there's Organizational Dungeons and Dragons as a study. Carter and Lester did Personalities of Players of Dungeons and Dragons and Psychological Reports. I know that Durenard and Klein did Alienation and the game Dungeons and Dragons and Psychological Reports. Dowse and McManus did the Personality of Fantasy Game Players in the British Journal of Psychology. co-opting culture and power, and sociology and culture was done by Garrick and Carly. And in the popular culture, Lancaster do role-playing games promote crime, Satanism, and suicide among players as critics claim? Short answer, no. And then Armando in Psychology in the Schools wrote emotional stability pertaining to the game Dungeons and Dragons. And then David Waldron wrote role-playing games in the Christian right, community formation and response to moral panic in the Journal of Religion and Pop Culture. So this is more recent, 2005. And then you have Zayas and Lewis that wrote fantasy role-playing for mutual aid in children's groups, a case illustration out of social work with groups. I mean, there was a ton of interest in these topics, right? Mm-hmm. Because I think we have a hangover a little bit in the sense that gamers were and are perceived as completely detached from society.
And socially inept, like incapable of being basically social.
Exactly, which is shocking when you even give it the moment's thought, because they have to get together in groups to do this. But it is interesting that these studies essentially found over and over and over again that there is no difference really between gamers and anybody else, mm-hmm. right? On almost any level, there's no real statistical difference, right? There's no higher amount of criminal behavior. There's no higher amount of mental illnesses. There's nothing, no differences, no higher incidence of Satanism. And in fact, religiosity is much lower in the gaming community today than in the European, Canadian, or even American averages.
That sounds like a great topic for another day. Let's talk about that.
We will, definitely. That being said, one thing that a couple of studies touched on was gamers tended to score higher in empathy. Now, without confusing correlation and causality, that raises an interesting question. Does gaming make people more empathic? Or do more empathic people become drawn to gaming? I don't know what the answer is, but it's an interesting question, right? Does the practice of continually putting yourself in the shoes of other people, does that make you more empathic as a person? Does that make you have the ability to look at situations, look at people, and figure that out? Or just because that's something that appeals to you to do anyways, does this give you a format to do that? Or is it a combination thereof?
And I think an interesting segue connected point to that is this literature on simulation, which you talked about the literature specifically on role-playing games, like actual studies on role-playing games and people, and the kind of the psychological profile of that. But there are 100,000 articles, not that many, there are probably like 50, on simulation.
That's academic 100,000.
Right. So, and I pulled this up because a professor of mine, a dear professor of mine who just passed away, wrote a lot about simulation. In her article, Reality Imagines the Choice to Use a Real-World Case in a Simulation by Dr. Langfield. Look it up. It's amazing. The reason I bring this up and simulation literature up is simulation literature, usually from an education standpoint, says that doing simulations of political science or historical events teaches people deeper information than they would otherwise just learn from a lecture and a test. So simulating those sorts of events, historical events, political negotiations, teaches people more than simply talking about the topic. That seems obvious from a learning development standpoint. That's how we teach people at work. We get them to do something in a mock scenario so that they will be better at it down the road. role-playing games do that same, or can do that same thing. If you learn to be a positive, adventurous, empathic person through gaming, you can do that in real life. You're faking it until you make it effectively. So I think the value of simulation in gaming cannot be overstated, is all I'm trying to make the point of.
I think that's interesting. Do you think then that would or are you aware of any studies that would see simulation as an ability to make someone more human, in the sense of like to increase empathy for situations through simulation? I know that that's been tried for various political and religious movements, in that they'll have simulations. This is often done to youth, which is, in my estimation, ethically problematic, but it is what it is. And they'll simulate the life of a refugee, or they'll simulate the homelessness. Is something near and dear to my heart. I think there's some concerns in how, homeless for a night. And aside from the ethical problems with that, I've definitely heard from people reporting themselves, like, listen, I spent a night, pretended to be homeless and had kind of a thing that I had to do during that night. And ever since then, I've been more open to discussing homelessness in a different and new way.
Yeah. From the literature that I've read, and I can't cite anything specific off the top of my head, but from the literature that I've read about this type of activity, there has to be an element of detached intentionality for it to seep in deeply, in that things like being homeless for a night have an impact, but it has less of an impact if someone goes into it knowing it's fake, but trying to make it feel real. That's I don't know what point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is that sometimes doing that even more unintentionally is a deeper impact on the longer scale. So it's why I think gaming in particular has the ability to have longer term impacts than those like momentary, like homeless for a night sort of incidences, which I think are valuable, but something that's smaller scale that has a lower impact becomes bigger in the long run. So I'm trying to think of a good example, like playing a positive character when you tend to be a curmudgeon. Over time, as you're playing this positive character, your positivity bowl gets bigger. You tend to be more positive. You tend to think more positively because you're spending more time pretending to be positive. And so in the end, you are overall a more positive person than you are when you began. I've read a couple of things that seem to indicate that is true.
That's interesting, because in philosophy, there is a lot of discussion about a almost fake it till you make it kind of approach to life and experience and being human. And I'm thinking specifically right now about a 4th century philosopher and theologian, Augustine, who very much talked about trying to act for him, his problem was sin. And he's trying to not be a sinner in my outward self, helped him to start to reflect that over time in his inner self.
Yep. And I think you see that in Nietzsche as well. This idea that if you're striving, if you act as the Superman, you will become the Superman eventually. Which I know that's a problematic term, but if you're looking at it from you're looking at that from a purely optimistic of humanity standpoint, you're still striving to be better than you are.
It's interesting.
We're gaming about.
Okay, it's not really good. It's not really good. It's not good radio to both sit here and reflect on this stuff. We need to keep going. Like, right on.
We'll think about that later.
I think that, so how does this then relate to developing characters you can relate
to? So I think if you go out of your way to either do two things, you can make a character you don't want to reflect good things about yourself or positive things um, or aspirational aspects of yourself as a way of then saying, opposite to that, now I know what I don't want to do. And so by playing this kind of dark character with these anger traits or these abusive traits, that I can recognize those things and I will not do them in my day-to-day life. Or you do the opposite. And I did this, it was pretty life-changing for me. I played a character that was, this is in the Birthright game that I played a character that was adventurous, that was friendly first. He assumed good for everyone. He was an optimist in everything. And he was trying to make the world better. And I said, wow, I am an angry, stuck in a terrible world at the moment. I'm super depressed. I think the worst of people. I'm a pessimist constantly. But after several years of playing this character that was constantly optimistic and constantly adventurous and constantly trying to do more, I said, I can do that. I can go out and be better than I am now. I don't have to be this morose, depressed, cycle of anger person anymore. I can be someone that's trying to make the world better by being a better person myself. So that's my personal story, at least related to this topic.
I think that's really interesting in that I'm thinking of two characters that I played back to back. I played a paladin named Winthrop Ramoth of the Order of the Fury Sun.
Nice.
And anyways, he started his life as a uber, the classic paladin lawful stupid, right? In the sense that I wanted to explore this topic of unfettered religiosity in a medieval setting, right? Of this person who had the legal and societal and just strength of arms kind of chutzpah to go out and impose his will, no matter how naive that might be, and to play that out. And over time, and I mean, a part of me was being reflected in that, in the sense that my own understanding and romanticism about particular parts of faith and of my idea of what faith in action in the world should look like, I would want it to play out and kind of do this with some of these personality aspects of standing up for what is right and all of these things. And as time went on, we played this thing for 5 years. As time went on, he never quite lost the grandiose swagger, but there was various moments when he was broken. And there was various moments when he discovered that true service to his deity and true service to his fellow man was about protection, was about, if I am strong, it is because I need to defend the weak. If I am loud, it is because I need to speak for those who are silent, right? True heroism and true braveries and mercy and largesse and these things. And he kind of, he essentially founded what he called the Order of Malak, which was like a fantasy version of the idealized Jesuits, I think. Just it definitely was this thing. But as time went on, I definitely not only started to explore parts of my personality that were maybe blossoming anyways, but I was able to tear them open a little bit and exercise them as though they were muscles. And then they got bigger and bigger and bigger. But during that time in my life, I was going through some occasionally quite dark things and life-changing things and changes in career and stuff like this. And so the character I followed up with was a mage named Drek, who was a selfish bastard. And the core question I put at the heart of that character was, is he going to turn out to be evil or not?
Mm.
And there was some darkness going on there, but I suddenly started to very much open up into that darkness. And some of that darkness and that, well, this guy's just a survivor because he's been through some shit, okay? I mean, a lot of that was autobiographical.
Hmm.
And he was angry. And he was not willing to trust anyone. He wanted to manipulate people around him to make himself feel better and protected, both socially and physically. And through playing him, and I only played him for a short amount of time because that thing ended in a TPK, long story. But in that, I started to discover that he came from a place of fear and pain, right? And his lashing out and the chance of him doing really destructive things, becoming evil, or his relationships with other people and stuff like that, it was all governed through fear and anger. And in a certain sense, he was never more than the child growing up on the mean streets of the white city in Elkanah. And that discovery on the heels of the previous work I had with the other character really helped me to view other people. And in my work, you know, I might get someone who is screaming in my face or saying really awful things about me or other people. And to understand that, you know, often this is coming from a place of this person's very scared right
Yeah.
And that's helped me a lot.
Yeah. We've gone a little bit over an hour now, Quinn. So let's dive into one segment, one last area for maybe 10 minutes,
Right.
and then go from there. And that's, I think, talking about empathy for the players at the table with us. We're both game masters. We both are pretty familiar with wanting to run a good story for the people that are there. And I think, obviously, wanting to run a good story comes from a place of wanting people to enjoy themselves. But I think there are other elements of empathy involved in this art, the art of storytelling, the art of game mastering. And I think it's the one that's hardest to do well, and I think we'll talk about it more next episode, is knowing what your players need with them telling you what they need, but also reading into some of their unspoken needs. I'm going to bring up an example, and then we'll kind of go back and forth real quick for that. I had a player recently in my vampire game that I mentioned that he is having or he was working through some kind of like childhood issues, which I didn't know, but I ended up running a scene where one of his character's childhood friends was potentially in lethal danger. And we walked through that in a way that showed how much his friend cared for the player's character. And the player, I kind of instinctually, like getting his feedback, realized that he didn't want this to end badly for his friend because it would cause a bad reaction for the player. So I changed the scene slightly so that it ended well for both of them, which was a really powerful moment for him to realize I as an adult male can have these friends that care this much about me based on my reflection of this character's childhood sort of interaction with this other character. So my question to you is, have you ever kind of experienced or run into something similar like that as a GM?
I think that I run into that all the time. Maybe not always specifically and viscerally as that initial thing. And I think that I've even seen it or see on a negative aspect as well. I think that we are naive to think that people come to the table unfettered. Our tables do not exist in a vacuum, in the sense that people are coming with baggage, they're coming with their days and their cares and their worries. And very often people are coming beat up, and this is their, quote unquote escape or their downtime. And when we're dealing with situations in gaming where players, I'm going to back that up. I lost that sentence. You'll hear me say this over and over again. So those of you that do listen to our podcast, I'm sorry. Gaming, when done well, is fictional people in a fictional world doing fictional things. But if done well, there's real emotional impact.
Yep.
And it's what often people who don't game don't get. And it's often what people who do game have a difficult time explaining.
Mm-hmm.
I've had situations where we've had people at the table jump up in excitement or be moved almost to tears because of what was happening in the storyline. I've had situations where I've been running the game and I've gotten to a point where I'm like, I need to stop right now. And I used to smoke. Now I'm one of these guys. I vape. But I was like, I need to go outside and have a smoke before we can go on because it was getting weird. I know that now I have a daughter. And media and emotions impact me differently now when it has to do with children.
Yeah.
I know that I can't take a lot of things like that anymore. It's not that I don't want to explore them. I'm not capable of it right now. That is too raw a thing. It's too visceral and real a fear in my life to examine something like
child violence. Yeah. It's not something I could bring myself to go over anymore either. I have a 2.5-year-old. I couldn't even imagine.
No, and I guess for me then, I don't consider myself a delicate flower in regards to what goes on. Like we love dark themes. I love gritty violence. I'm willing to explore evil, straight up evil at my table. That being said, with everyone on board,
right?
But I have, when been involved in a storyline and it comes close to child violence, I've said nope, we're not going there.
Yep.
Just period. We need to move the story from here to somewhere else. And I'm only barely comfortable with saying, lower the curtain and do the Hitchcockian off screen. That's barely better to me right now. That being said, I guess that's what I have to say now.
Yeah. No, I think that's important for us to know where our limits are. Both know what our limits for our players are and our limits as storytellers, as game masters are, because like you mentioned, both of us like to play dark games. There are lots of dark games on the market. There's a reason for that. But there's also a moment where you have to recognize that this is going to hurt my players or this is going to hurt me. And if it's going to hurt my players, I'm not going to do it. I can hurt their characters all day long and be 100% okay with that. But the moment I hurt one of my players, I have failed as a game master. I have failed as a friend. And if someone is at my table, even if it's at a convention game for 2 hours that they're going to be playing with me and I'm never going to see them again, they're my friend for that time. And I need to take care of them. And I need to make sure that they are going to get something positive out of this experience. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that happens. And if I hurt them as a player, I have failed that. And I'm going to do everything possible not to have that happen to my player. I want them to feel emotion, but I don't want to hurt them during that process.
I completely and absolutely agree. And in regards to that, I think that sometimes that more serious consideration is hidden in a lot of gaming conversation about table management, which we're going to talk about in the next episode, everybody.
Yep.
And I think that, how do I deal with the problem gamer? Or how do I, so-and-so keeps bringing up this thing that keeps, making everyone at the table uncomfortable. And those conversations very much have an undercurrent of empathy, and they have this undercurrent of how do I understand where this person's coming from, how to have this conversation, and how to move on. I have people that I've gamed with who started to go down a destructive path at the table.
Yep.
Right? And I saw personal relationships start to come at jeopardy at the table. And to my shame, sometimes I did nothing.
Yeah.
To my, in other cases, I did jump in. And as I'm getting older, I'm more comfortable jumping in. And
I think we're going to go in next episode and dive in and give people some of our experiences with that.
Yeah.
And give people some of the tools that we have learned over the years and how to manage those sorts of things. Because I think being able to manage that is exactly as you said. That's a clear sign of mature empathy, and experience and gaming experience has brought us to be capable of doing that. I think, as deep and awesome as this conversation is, we should probably call this episode to a close. We need to create some cool sort of ending thing to talk about maybe at the last minute or so. I don't know what that would be.
We do need to come up with something. Why, if the viewers have gotten this far, or the listeners have gotten this far, I'm going to ask you guys to say, what do you think we should do to wrap up the show? Let us know, and maybe we'll do it. Up to and including partial nudity on the part of Josh. I am willing.
I don't think so.
No, let me know what you think is what you think we could do to close the show out, because I really don't have a lot of good ideas at this point. I hope you enjoyed the show. I really enjoyed having this conversation.
It's a great conversation. I hope we have more of them.
Absolutely. What we've decided, everyone, so that you know, is that we put together a group of about 6 episodes for our first season. We're planning on releasing this about once a month. It's going to be here on YouTube. We're hoping to put it up as a podcast to download on iTunes, on the High Level Games iTunes feed soon. And the next one we're going to be talking about is going to be table management. And that is very much going to be a conversation about what to do with these problem gamers and stuff. And we felt that that topic was very much suggested by this topic.
Absolutely.
All right. Josh, cool. This is us signing off, I think. Josh is our blog manager over at High Level Games. And I am VP Quinn, and please check us out on YouTube, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, Facebook, and you know what? You could even go over to producer Monkey Joel's house if you want. We'll just post up his address in the show notes. And that's basically just to see if he listens to the end too.
Right. All right. So I'm going to end this with what I hope will become a cool catchphrase. Let's level up.
Let's level up indeed. All right. Bye-bye, guys.